Another day, another virtual run. This one would have been the A race for the year. For only the second time in this event's history, it wouldn't take place. And for the second time in my running journey, I didn't get the chance to take on this iconic race. Hello and welcome to the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast. My name is Neil Marsh, Coach Marshy, and I am a qualified running coach and personal trainer with a sport and exercise science degree. So I like to think all the information I give comes from an educated place and somewhere that we can rely on. So welcome to today's episode. How are you all doing? Are you doing well? Have you had a good week? Has it been a good running week, bad running week? What kind of week has it been for you? If you want to get in contact, you just let me know. Get in contact through any of my social media channels. If you just put podcast and that you're reacting to that, and let me know how you are getting on. So what am I talking about there at the beginning? A race which still remains on my bucket list, still on the bucket list, still something I really want to do. So of course, for anyone who follows me or follows the running industry and community, it is the New York Marathon that I'm referring to. So for only the second time in its history in 2020, this historic race, this iconic New York Marathon wouldn't take place. So it's the second time, and the first time was back in 2012 due to Hurricane Sandy, causing absolute devastation in the whole of the East Coast, really, of America, but particularly in New York and Manhattan itself. And then also the second time is the year of 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. And yes, I was meant to be on the start line back in 2012 and again this year in 2020. So on two occasions, I should have been on that start line. And it makes me ask the question, how many others were going to attempt the event back in 2012 for the first time and hadn't yet been back to try, but were also meant to be on the start line in 2020? It's a question that I have, and I will probably get in contact with the New York road runners to find out, to see if there's many of us that were particularly in that position. So 2012, the story behind that one, that was going to be my first marathon. It was going to be my first attempt at running 26.2 miles. And I was really excited. I was ready to go. And then a couple of weeks before it, a week or so before it, the hurricane hit on the East Coast of America, and it looked like it was headed for New York. And really sad story, it did end up hitting New York, and lots of people unfortunately lost their lives and lost their homes and caused utter devastation. I kind of got a second-hand view of it, because my older sister lives in New York with my brother-in-law, and they lived in the heart of Manhattan at the time, and it was scary watching on FaceTime with them as they took cover in their apartment up on the 18th floor. It was pretty scary. And the thing is just a few days after, myself and my dad were due to fly to New York to take part in the New York Marathon. Now, the way it happened was the race was very much on, and the charity I was running for and the authorities in New York and everywhere else, the race was on. So we decided we would go, probably due to the added fact that the family, there's family members there and we wanted to see them. So we went, and we were the first flight to land in JFK post Hurricane Sandy from London Heathrow, and it was a ghost town. I've been to New York luckily a few times, due to obviously having my sister there, and it was an experience like no other. Walked into this world-renowned airport that is packed 24/7, and there was just no one there. We were the first ones in. We were through within minutes, which for anyone that's been to the States will know that it's not always that quick. So especially when you're going into somewhere like New York, and we were through, and we were outside the front getting a taxi into Manhattan to the Upper East Side to where my sister lives, and the event was on, and it was Thursday. So went about my stuff, did my prep. It was going to be my first one, lots of effort going into it. And on Friday morning, headed down to the convention center, but we went via the only subway station that was sort of accessible, if you like, or was still open and running at that point following the hurricane. So we managed to go down. You could go down as far as 33rd Street, and then the train terminated there. So anyone who's ever been to Manhattan, there's a lot longer. A lot of the train goes a lot further down than that, but that's as far as you could get because it was flooded. So we got out, and we got out the subway, came up the steps, and if you looked uptown towards Central Park, it looked like you'd expect to see New York from the movies in full flow, taxis everywhere, sirens, it was exactly what you'd expect. And then we turned around and looked downtown, and it was like watching a scene out of I Am Legend or The Day After Tomorrow. It was unbelievable. It was just like a movie. And never in a million years would you fly into a disaster zone. You always say that when you watch the movies. And yet there we were. Myself and my dad had flown in for this event that was still going ahead. And I couldn't believe it. And it's a really sad story for so many people. And I definitely pay my respects to those people every year that lost their lives in that disaster. And I'm very grateful that my sister and brother-in-law are all safe still and were at the time. And I think when I was there, however, it was an experience that you would never have expected to have seen. So anyway, we strolled over we were on one side, we strolled over to the other side of Manhattan, took a walk over to the convention center, picked up the race number. Anyone who's done a marathon, you get it, the expo, you go get your number, you get your t-shirt, you get anything else, your chip time in, all of that. So I got it. And it was Friday afternoon, and I treated myself to a hot chocolate because I was being really good. So I had a hot chocolate because I knew I had a 10-day holiday after. So I knew I could let loose on the American style cuisine, if you like, especially in Manhattan itself and New York. It's definitely an amazing experience if you like your food like I do. But it was a moment where I just treated myself to hot chocolate. So then we went back to my sister's apartment, and brother-in-law finished work. And I think it was about 5:30 in the evening, and I was doing some foam rolling, getting ready. And then the mayor came on, the mayor of New York City, and he announced that the race would not go ahead. And I thought, oh, well, just that split second, I was devastated. All that training, my first marathon. And then it hit me. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about all the runners that were going to run. It was bigger than that. It was more important than that. It was about people. And it was absolutely 100% the right decision that they made to cancel that marathon that day. And I will stand by that for the rest of my life. That it was the right decision. How can you run a marathon that has people who haven't yet recovered loved ones just meters from the side of where the run would go past? And it was the right decision. And normally at a lot of these bigger events, anyone who's done them, you'll know that people like to wear a hoodie or tracksuits while they wait on the start line. And in New York particularly, what happens is that stuff gets collected because you're basically just throwing it away, and it gets handed out to homeless people and homeless charities throughout New York. So it's really great. But what they decided to do is they decided to put bins every fourth block in Manhattan for anyone that was going to run the marathon. Would they be willing to donate? They were donation bins in general, for the Hurricane Sandy victims, for people to donate clothing for the families that had lost everything. But they encouraged the New York marathoners to go and put the tracksuit that they were going to throw away basically into one of those. And I just thought, yep, absolutely, that's the small part I can play. So I went and did that. And I chucked in a few of these tops as well that I had spare from a former business in Saint Terrain. I had lots of spare tops and I just threw them all in because I just thought, hopefully it'll make a difference to someone. And you know, it was an experience that you just would never have wanted to be in and never wanted to witness, but I did. And it was 100% the right decision. But then when you're met with that kind of adversity and that kind of situation where it's not your fault, there's nothing you could have done, it's control the controllables, you did that, but then it still didn't happen. What can you get out of it? And you got to make it count. And my dad and myself were heading off to Washington after the marathon it was meant to be. I was going to sit on the train for 3 hours the next day, get a good night's sleep, and then have a couple of tourist days in Washington. So we still did that, and we made it count. We made it mean something to us. And to this day now, all these years later, I still am very grateful for that day with my dad. And when the election comes around every 4 years for the presidency since then, it's definitely something that I have thought about, and it was all happening. We were there on election day. It was an experience like no other. So you got to make these things count. And yes, I wasn't there. I wasn't able to run, but running took me there on that occasion. I made it count, and it's all about that. It's making it count, and the people, the relationships, and the journey you go on during running. It's not always about the times and running PBs and running events. There's so much more that you can get out of it. So I did go on to do my first marathon in 2013. My charity were really kind. They gave me a place in London. No extra money needed to be raised. The money that I'd raised for New York all was going to count for that. So it was an absolute pleasure and privilege to run the London Marathon in 2013. And I certainly ran it for every single victim of that Hurricane Sandy. So then we move forward year after year. It creeps by. My sister continues to stay there with my brother-in-law. They have my niece, and they decide that they're going to maybe put a little bit more roots down in the States and in the New York area. And I think, yep, I'll go next year. I'll go next year. I'll go next year. No, you don't. 2019. Come on, let's do it. Let's go in 2020. It made a lot of sense because my own son would have still been under the age of 2. And with my sister finally putting roots down and my brother-in-law buying a house in the suburbs, there was places and space for us to stay. So realistically, it was just the flight with no expense for my own son. So it made a lot of sense to go. Also, my new nephew was born in May. So it was going to be that experience where we could get to meet him, all the family were coming, etc., etc. You just imagine what that was going to be like. It was going to be awesome. And then COVID-19. Absolutely the right decision for the race to be cancelled, and the right decision for it to be cancelled very early, which I think a lot of the other majors didn't quite get. Whereas the guys in New York obviously were very realistic about the situation and understood that it wasn't able for a mass participation, not just in terms of runners, but in terms of spectators as well, for that event to go ahead. So they called it early, and it was great. The best thing for us is that I got accepted into the race in sort of February time, and COVID had started to pick up, unfortunately. So we just sat and watched for a bit and didn't book a flight. And then as that developed, we decided not to book a flight. And then subsequently, it turned out that they pulled the race a long time before it. So we didn't need to book a flight. So was it ever really real? Maybe, maybe not. I had a place in the race. I hopefully will get a place in the future as part of that. But we pulled it. and we never really were booked in to go as such with a flight. So, but now we sit here and we realised that it would have been kind of on the election anniversary. The Washington idea would have still been there. Would have probably tried to replicate that a little bit with a few of us guys in the family doing that. Maybe, I don't know, but it wasn't to be, and it was 100% the right decision. So that's really the story of my New York. Should have been on the start line twice. The 2 times in history that the event's never happened since it started. It got cancelled on the 2 years that I was meant to do it. Both right decisions, as I say. So the virtual, so like all the other good events, they turned it into a virtual, and I have to say it was extremely well organised again. Brilliant event to take part of as part of the virtual. And really, it was only 3 clear weeks from the London Marathon virtual that I'd done and really struggled on, which is mentioned on one of the previous episodes. And it was a real struggle for me, the London. So I thought, oh, here we go again. I don't want to ever go into another marathon where I struggle again. I hadn't done previously. I've just had a couple of years that have been off. And I decided that I would never, after London, do another marathon where I struggled. Obviously, there wasn't enough time to put any training in between the London virtual and the New York virtual. So I accepted that this might still be a struggle. It was a different animal, different beast. But I taught my classes at my gym and said to the members as I left, it can't be any worse weather-wise than a few weeks before, right? As in, it couldn't be any worse than the London virtual because the weather was dire. We were soaked by the end of the road and had to basically spend the rest of the race being soaked through to the skin. But you bet it was unreal. You couldn't have written it. Nice sunny morning. By the time I got out there and started running, wow. It started to trickle with rain for that 0.3 of a mile at the end of the road. By the time I turned right and hit the first house on the right, the heavens opened and I was soaked. And I mean, could it have been any worse? Yeah, it was. It was much worse. So much worse. I was absolutely wringing my clothes out within 0.5 of a mile. And as I approached a mile, I thought, I'm going to pull the plug. I've got one more day to do this. I don't need to do this right now. What am I doing out in this weather? But then I carried on trotting, and I had two people with me. So Michelle and Reggie were with me. Reggie was in the buggy, and then I had Sarah as well, a good running friend and good friend, and she continued to run next to me, and so did Michelle, and they encouraged me. They got me out the door. And about 2.5 miles in, good friend and great runner Andrew Carver comes running towards me, ultra runner, sort of going for UTMB qualification, that kind of standard. And he comes running up beside me, and he'd kind of closed the gap of 3 miles, having seen my shared WhatsApp location that day. And he came running up the side, and he joined in at 2.5 miles. And he just started talking, and he talked me into taking it easy, taking some deep breaths, calming down, which was awesome. And, Michelle and Sarah there as well. And it was all coming together nicely, even though I was soaked to the skin. So the positive first 5K, it was good. Michelle then peeled off to go and get me some clean, dry clothes, which would be something that I could change into later on at about half marathon. And then unfortunately, Sarah got a bit of an injury, so she had to drop away at about 5 miles into it. But Andrew was there, and I had him, and we carried on chatting. We're chatting about various things, the Run Britannia that had just been released here in the UK for 2023, where you run from Land's End to John O'Groats. And it was just, we were chatting running. Andrew is also a big Norwich City fan like I am, with him being from Norfolk. So we were chatting Norwich City, and I guess with a bit of luck that day, we were the 12:30 kickoff. So we were kind of chatting through the team who was starting. Then as the game took place, we went through it, what was going on, we were winning, that kind of thing. And it kind of kept the conversation buoyant and perhaps not about what was going on the watch. You know, we're all good at that. We're great at having a good look at the watch and going, oh yeah, we're not on track, da da da. But actually it took us away from that. And that got us running well towards sort of my home village of Histon, where I knew the garage at the back of my mum and dad's was where Michelle would be with some nice dry clothes and some refuel as well. And as it stood, Andrew took me round a bit of a longer loop to make it a bit longer. So I did get there at about 12 and a half miles, which was awesome. Then managed to trot out the door again. Nice clean clothes, rain jacket on this time, having had a nice sunny morning. Then the heavens opened and caught me out. So got the rain jacket on. And then Joe joined in, good friend of mine, and Andrew and Joe just trotted and chatted me through the next sort of 4 miles, really. And we were just chewing over the Norwich game, chewing over running, and actually chewing over the COVID situation as well, because just as the Norwich game was coming to an end, we got the news that our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was about to come on TV. Most of you will remember that night where he was about 3 hours late or whatever it was. And it was a bit of a joke, really, because we looked at it and we were like, oh, he's coming on at 4. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to be back in time. I'd love to see it. You know, being a business owner, I wanted to know what was going to happen. I wanted to be like hearing it firsthand out the horse's mouth. And luckily I did see it. Actually, I had a bath as well. But managed to see that. But that's irrelevant. The point is that Andrew got me to 17 miles without me really realizing it this time. Now, if you think back to the London, I was absolutely struggling at 12 miles. So something had changed. Now, whether that was mindset when you're out there running, what do you think? What do you think when you're out there running? Do you have days where your mindset is great, days where your mindset is poor? You know, you must have that as well. We all have that. So what do you think? What happens to you when you're in that scenario? And for me, it was a different beast. It was a different animal. I was running. I felt okay. And Andrew decided to leave me at 17 miles, which was okay. That was great. He'd done 30 miles in helping me and another lady from my running club, Jane, on the same virtual challenge. So he'd done his fair share for sure. So I trotted across this one area in Cambridgeshire, which is an old airfield road, which is closed to the public as they're building on that area. And but the footpath remains open, and trotted across there, and then got to the other side, and there was Prowsey, Monica, Sim and Jax, which was great because it just meant that where I thought I was going to be on my own for quite a while back to my house, actually Monica jumped out, ran with me for a bit, which was great. Plenty of support there. Got back to the camper van, which had gone on a couple of miles down the road, had a bit of a refuel there. Then Prowsey came out with me and ran a couple of miles from that point down to Swavesey, which only left me a mile to go to my house. Now, the plan had been to get back to my house at 15 miles. The way it turned out is I actually got back at 23 and a half due to the weather, the adaptable change of plan, the adaptability that I had during the actual marathon itself. And that's important, is that adaptability factor. Things weren't quite going right. So I decided to adapt it, and it worked on the day. So sort of said bye to Prowsey, Monica, Sim and Jax, and then they actually followed me through Swavesey village, which is where I live, which was from the guided bus that we have there, which I'd ran down. I had 1.1 miles to go, which took me up to 23 and a half. And they come flying past in the village and said, we're going to your house. So they went to the house, popped the top of the camper van up and had a cup of tea and a little treat of their own. And what was amazing for me is when I got back to my road, I turned into my road, and we've got this big green in the middle of our street, and we're off in the left-hand corner, and there was the little boy in his Halloween outfit, because it was Halloween, dressed as a spider. And as soon as he realised it was me, he went for a little jog towards me, and he ran towards me, pointing at me. And, you know, we're all biased towards our kids, I guess. But for me, it was just one of them moments that was priceless. And what was even better is we did catch it on film as well. my partner managed to catch it on camera, which was amazing, and something that we can always have, something that I'll always cherish, and something that we can embarrass him about when he's a little bit older. So so that was kind of 23 and a half. And then what was great is Reggie and Michelle got kitted up and in the running buggy again, and off we went and finished it. And I finished it, and I remember finishing it and feeling much better. The smile was on my face this time. You know, Prousey Monica Jackson Sims said you look like a different bloke compared to the photographs that we saw from London. And it was very much a very different animal. And I'm pleased to say yet another virtual done. And the best thing is they are going to send the medal, New York Marathon, and I want to have a medal for the 2 years, because they sent the first one. 2012 was before virtual running. So they sent the first medal in 2012. They sent it as a token gesture for everyone that was meant to be in the race, because obviously it's got the year on, so they couldn't reuse it. So I have that one. It's proudly hung on my little medal hall just outside of this studio, and it hangs there, and no one really realizes that it didn't happen, but I'm always honest. But what will be great is that I have 2 medals for the 2 New York marathons that did never go ahead. So for me, that might sound like all those poor people that have suffered in both of those situations, Hurricane Sandy and the pandemic, is horrendous. But for me, what I will say is that I've got those 2 medals for me, to remember the 2 events that I should have been in, and I'll never forget the people that were affected and the reasons why those events didn't happen. And that for me is what it's all about. It's all about people, relationships, and experiences. And I think, like, looking back at it now at 2012, I wouldn't have wanted to run. I don't think, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. It wouldn't have been good if it had gone ahead. So, and then the same this year, it was never able to go ahead. So the virtual, good replacement, good event, great day for me, great experience. Obviously celebrated with a bath and a beer, and chilled out on the sofa, watched a film, Halloween related, and had a good overindulgence, as you would, and had a better recovery week following it as well, which is always a positive as well. So what I would say is I kind of know that I'm going to keep trying to get to New York one day to do the marathon. And until then, I'm going to enjoy the journey of getting there. I'm going to keep fighting for it, keep going for it. It's on the bucket list, and I'm just going to try, and we'll see what happens. And hopefully I will be lucky enough to get there on that start line for real, and I'll be able to get round it. And do you know what? What I'll say now is I'll pledge it on here to myself. And if you want to keep me accountable, that's up to you guys 100%. It'd be great if you could. I will run that race one day for everyone in 2012 that lost their life, for everyone in 2020 that lost their life due to natural disaster, due to natural mother nature taking its course, with the pandemic as well. So I will run it for those people, and I will remember those people, because for me, I was involved in an event that didn't happen, and I want to make it count when it does. And I'm not sure how I'm going to run it in terms of any sort of charity-based stuff as well. I'll think about that between now and when the day hopefully arrives one day. So just to recap, what would I say the take home is? That golden nugget for me is make the most of any situation and control the controllables. If you control the controllables and something bad happens, that's okay. The question is, what do you do to get back up again and make the most of the situation? 2012 made it happen with my dad on a day out that will never be forgotten, that hopefully one day I can replicate with my son and tell him that we did this. Me and granddad did this. And that family time is priceless that we've had during COVID. And I know it's an awful time and it's a struggle, but all of this stuff that would have been going on otherwise, that family time that I've gained, controlled the controllables, completed the virtual run. That's all you can do. And then finally, the journey, the people, the experience, the relationships that you build. You cannot beat that. For me, that is what running is all about. We can all get fixated with a Garmin. That's easy. We can all get fixated on splits and time, PBs. That's easy. But what about all the other things that you get from it? It's just something that I really, really value. And I think a lot of people undervalue what it is you get from it. And it's not until they get injured or it gets taken away from them that they struggle with that. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. More about a story and a journey than any sort of pure advice, but hopefully you can get something from it yourself. And if you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to head over to my YouTube channel for running tips and how you can work on your strength and conditioning for running and learn more about my journey if you want to. And please don't forget to review the podcast on whichever platform you're on. Give it a little rating, give a review, and absolutely share it if you can with anyone who you think might be interested in what it is we've been talking about either today or on the previous episodes. So I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I hope we can meet again here next week to discuss more on the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast.